The man who next created disruptive change in Turkish religious life, Said Nursi, lived a long life from 1873 to 1960. However, the disruptive change again occurred in a relatively short time span, in his case from 1925 to about 1944, when he wrote the vast collection of treatises known collectively as the Risale-i Nur, for which he wished to be remembered. Within the universe, just as God makes the sun and moon attend to their duties, the manifestations of his omnipotence also include a magical emanation of true planning, administering, regulating, purifying, and assigning duties. The master of the universe is the master of modernity. In addition to arguing that materialist science could not undermine religious truth, Said's movement also embodied a new phase in the transformation of religious forms of organization and action. During Said's lifetime, his movement accomplished the entire transition in the production of Islamic knowledge from oral to textual and from manuscript to printed. The Nur movement divided into several branches after Said's death in 1960. Gradually, it became apparent that a young religious leader who was also a student of Said Nursi's writings was going to become a new leader of exceptional impact. This was Fethullah Gülen, born in 1938. Like Mevlana Khalid and Said Nursi, Fethullah Gülen made history in a relatively short time span. His movement expanded from local to national to global just since about 1983. During the past 2 centuries, 3 great renewals have transformed Ottoman and Turkish religious culture. A leader exceptional for his piety, learning, and vision launched each movement. At some point, each leader ran into trouble with government authorities suspicious of change that they could not control. These renewal movements won many followers, largely because they responded particularly well to the challenges and crises that Muslims were experiencing at the time, whether it was the 1820s, the 1920s, or the 1980s. In terms of their social organization and their means of propagating their beliefs, the movements differ notably, yet the differences fit together end to end, tracing a significant learning curve in religious history.
The third theme that I have over here is that the Zionist connections, similar to the American connections. In this theme, Gülen is portrayed as a Zionist comparator who works with the Mossad and Israel, while some articles show that Gülen as a crypto-Jew, meaning who is a Jewish but hiding his identity, along with the leading members of the AKP government, and others claim Gülen only works for the Zionist groups. In 2007, Ergun Poyraz wrote a series called Moses' Sons, or Moses' Children. In these books, he proves that Abdullah Gül, the president of Turkey, Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan, and AKP's leading figure, Bülent Arınç, and Gülen are descendants of Jews. These books are titled as Moses' AKP, Moses' Gül, Moses' Children, Tayyip and Emine, and etc. You can see the full list in the appendix. The English versions I have has very different picture than this one. And again, there are several themes in this one also. The first one is Trojan horse, modern Islam as taqiyya. This Trojan horse term is used by almost everybody, by both sides. Gülen is not as he seems to be. It's something else. He has a hidden agenda. That's why it's used. One of the earliest defamatory articles was written by Paul Stenhouse at Quadrant, and he claimed that Gülen movement is a group that is expresso dedicated to promoting an Islamist ideology. And as it can be understood clearly from his title, Islam's Trojan Horse, Turkish Nationalism and the Naqshbandi Sufi Order, he claims that despite the fact that the Gülen movement is promoting tolerance and interfaith dialogue, in reality it has a hidden Islamist agenda. This is the table that we have. In total, you can see Gülen 1 is in Turkish 98%. 98% of the articles in Turkish are saying Gülen is a Vatican, CIA, American agent. Only 2% are saying that Gülen is Islamic danger or the second Khomeini. In the English version, 11% are only 11% are saying that Gülen is an Islamist danger. Sorry, the reverse. Gülen is working for the Vatican or the United States, but 89%, 90% are saying Gülen is an Islamist danger. He's the second Khomeini. Both literature review and the statistical analysis show that these defaming articles are not random. They are targeting specific audiences, and they are acting according to languages.
The dynamic of the trial is really fascinating. And it's even more fascinating, of course, because at the end of the day, Gülen wins, which is highly unusual for political trials. I mean, all we have to do is look at Socrates, Jesus, the Inquisition, the women at Salem, John Scopes, those religious political trials that happened in our history. The other thing I really came to appreciate was the enormous sacrifice a lot of people have made in this change that has gone on, this amazing change that has gone on in Turkey that resulted in the referendum on September 12th, changing the constitution and enhancing civil liberties and human rights. So great respect. And many people died. Many people were in exile. Many people were in prison for a long time. And I had the honor of meeting some of them. The Gülen movement, in a sense, represents, I think, the challenge of the challenge between the Anatolia bourgeoisie emerging and the old Istanbul bourgeoisie, or as somebody once told me, the white Turks versus the black Turks. That this is the change. This is and you think about this is a serious challenge to the status quo that essentially was unregulated and was basically dipping its fingers or its hands into the treasury and running its life the way that it run to run its life. You have the whole deep state problem that we see has come up in all of the documents released through the Ergenekon and the Sledgehammer indictments, right? The interplay between all of these entities I just mentioned, the interplay and the tight military-industrial complex, and how the Gülen movement threatens that because it's a popular movement that nobody can get its hands on, right, in the way that we think about organizational stuff in the United States. And it's a threat because you can't control it. People see it happening in front of them, the establishment, the economic order, and it's a threat to them. And there are all sorts of other things going on too. You know, the interference with the drug trade that has become part of the deep state, or trafficking, or why is it that PKK does what it does when it does? Is it just stirring up violence in order to keep the repression going, in order to keep the reaction to support the military so you can have more conflict? All that dynamic that goes on, I think all leads to the prosecution of Fethullah Gülen. So, but the media in Turkey too, and the journalists and the print thing carry much more sway with people than they do in the United States. Journalists, for example, will appear on the front page of papers. They're paid very well. People pay attention to the political commentary. And so when you have this campaign start against Gülen, people look at it. Even people in the movement, I'm sure, said, wow, what's going on? Where there's smoke, is there fire? And that was part of what's going on. One of the good things that happened by chance, I interviewed the lawyer in May about this, pure chance. One of the lawyers says to Gülen one day in Izmir, why don't you start suing these people for defamation? And Gülen said, no, you know, I'm not like that. Well, anyway, it happened. The lawyer talked him into it. The good thing is that the lawyers were able to, they brought something like 300 cases altogether, all across Turkey. But the lawyers the fact that they got a huge number of judgments in the courts for defamation, they were able to use later on in the criminal trial to show that the allegations brought by the prosecutor were not true. Okay, what was the wild card? The wild card was the European Union, the accession agreements. Turkey was bound and determined to come into the European Union, and as a requisite for coming into the European Union, it had to change its legal system. Changing its legal system meant abolishing the state security courts, meant allowing religious freedom, and it meant ensuring civil liberties. And it took Turkey a long time to come into compliance with those requirements in the accession agreements. It happens during the Gülen trial. That's why I call it the wild card. That is why Gülen wins the trial in the end. The indictment is awful if you read it. I mean, it's everything, all of this stuff, all of this trash stuff that was up here earlier. The secret cardinal. I mean, all of that stuff is in the indictment. And it looks like a cut and paste job, actually, that he'd end up Xeroxing or something. I mean, it's just, I mean, it's amazing the lack of integrity in bringing forward this criminal prosecution. But anyway, he does it. And of course, the day before he files the indictment, he leaks it to the press, you know, and that all of that goes back and forth. Gülen is indicted as a terrorist. All the evidence, I mean, is clearly fabricated, but it's there, right? Or create that smoke. Where's there smoke, there's fire. And of course, the acquittal comes in the appeals court at the same time that Gülen is acknowledged as one of the top 20 intellectual leaders in the world. So it was a good month for Gülen. But it was even better the next month. Because parallel to this, and if you don't believe in the deep state, you will after you hear this. Parallel to this, when Gülen was in the United States, he had applied to be a religious scholar. Now, and the US government said, no, you're not a religious scholar. What do you mean a picture of the Pope? Who took that picture? I'm not kidding. This is the, you know, I just got done bad-mouthing the indictment in Turkey. Well, you ought to read some of the United States Justice Department pleadings. Just absurd. Anyway, the judge at one point gets so fed up with this nonsense that he calls the lawyers in, as judges do when they get hacked off, and say, I want whoever's making that decision in front of me in 10 minutes. And the lawyer for the government says, Your Honor, this decision is coming higher than Homeland Security. And it's coming so high that I cannot get that person in front of you. So it narrows it down. We know Bush didn't think about this. So that narrows it down to either Cheney or Rumsfeld. And the judge says, yeah, whatever, and grants religious scholar status. 2 days after this happens, Gülen's attorneys made the decision not to release it to the press. I'm wrapping, this is my coda. Not to release it to the press because of the CIA agent thing, you know, just let it happen. Well, 2 days later, it was in the Turkish press. So somebody from the inside the United States government leaked it. Clarence Darrow, this is my wrap-up, okay? Clarence Darrow used to say that the law, and Clarence Darrow was a famous human rights lawyer in the United States, very earthy, used to say the law is the bastard child of justice. He was absolutely right. But in this sense, in this one instance in history, and I'm glad to have written the book about it, justice and the law coincided, and Turkey is better off in terms of religious freedom, in terms of democracy, and in terms of human rights, thanks to this trial.
I think that the position of Mr. Gülen is an important antidote to the kind of fear that has emerged in an era of terrorism. Terrorists, even when they don't mean to, often provoke reactions by democratic publics to restrict civil liberties, to actually diminish tolerances. This is one of the worst effects of terrorism, that even when the terrorists don't do it to us, we often do this to ourselves. We hurt ourselves. Well, what Mr. Gülen is doing and what the Gülen movement is doing is working against this restriction of civil liberties to sort of build tolerance in an era when we need it most. The American public is only now learning about the Gülen movement, and I think the Gülen movement is important for promoting understanding and cross-cultural dialogue, something absolutely crucial in our increasingly interconnected world, and also crucial in an era of terrorism.